Hello, my name is Brian Streck. I am a pattern maker for Neenah Foundry. I've been at the foundry for over 20 years. This is the oldest cover that we've been able to find. It was located between Riverside Park and Muller Museum. We believe it to be over 100 years old, as we cannot find it in any of our archives or catalogs. It was made by the Allward & Son Foundry, which was on the corner of North Lake Street and Main Street.
And there was an 18-year period where we sold castings branded under both the Allward family name and the Neenah Foundry name. The second generation Allward didn't have a succession plan, and when he passed away, there was nobody to take over the business. That was in 1941, and that was the end of the line for the Allward name. Now, in the meantime, Neenah Foundry had been operating on Winneconne Avenue since 1918. The name changed in 1923, and then after the second generation Allward passed away, then the two foundries were merged, and it all became operating out of the Winneconne Avenue location. So we know that anything says Allward, we know it's pre-1941. Anything that says Neenah Foundry, we know it's after 1923.
This is the second oldest cover that we believe to have. It was also cast by Allward & Sons. It is a very early C-cope design, which was a square, but later we changed to a diamond around 1934. We don't know why they chose to do squares instead of diamonds. Purely cosmetic, probably. The cope is the top half of the mold, which is also considered the street side. The drag is the bottom half of the mold, which is the underside of the lid.
And the Type C cope originally was called a checkered cope, probably because it looks like a checkerboard. But as Brian had mentioned, it over time has evolved into diamonds rather than squares. And so now more often it's referred to as the crosshatch cope instead of the checkered cope.
This cover was very common in the early days of Neenah Foundry. It is a D-style cover. It is also called the Chicago Standard. Most of the transportation in Chicago around the turn of the century was by horse. The D-cope design was raised to aid in traction for the horse's hooves, but in later years it was recessed to comply with ADA and make less of a tripping hazard. But these covers are easy to find throughout the state of Wisconsin still to this day.
Driving around town, we actually were seeing these in the street, and we had permission from both the cities of Neenah and Menasha that we could collect them as long as we replaced that with an equivalent. So we went out several summers ago, and we actually went collecting. And once people learned that we were beginning to look for these, I would get emails with pictures showing me where people were finding them so that we had directions where to go to find these different copes. And we've collected about a dozen of them that are all old antiques.
This is the Neenah Foundry B-cope. It's basically the Wisconsin standard. This is also the most popular lid found throughout the world. The B-cope has remained unchanged since 1934. Some foundries give different copes nicknames, and this one is also called the waffle cope. All designs on the top of lids are there to keep people from slipping.
So one thing that's interesting is the recessed pockets provide enough traction that it's not slippery as it is. Prior to World War II, this was all done by hand on the floor. There was no machinery. They put the pattern on the floor, they put the flask on the pattern, they paper drawings and sketches and hand tools. And nowadays, yes, it's all done in CAD. Much of this is done with automated machinery, so we're cutting these things on milling machines rather than hand fabricating it. It's an interesting transition.
The next lid is a logo lid, which was developed in 2014 for the city of Neenah and has become the Neenah Standard. It can be found more regularly throughout the rest of the city. We make about 200 different logo lids, as they are becoming very popular in most municipalities. You'll notice there is Perma Grip, which aids in traction.
Well, the Perma Grip, of course, is what you see that looks like the leaves on the tree. That's actually Perma Grip texture. And so you can see it, you can see the highlights of the texture, and that actually then gives it a non-slip. But we often use it on custom logo lids because it gives the natural look of vegetation, trees and branches and leaves. Well, that's actually the logo for the city of Neenah that appears on all of the communications on the website, on their stationery, on their letterhead. The history of the council tree actually predates the city of Neenah. It goes back to the early 1800s. What we wanted to display is all of the older covers have the natural patina that was developed over time. The Neenah council tree, that actually we wanted to look like a new cover, so we actually blasted and clear coated it to make it look like it was new as opposed to an older antique. But all of the older covers, this is the natural finish as we found them in the streets.